Hi, friends. Welcome to Jesus for Her. I'm Kathy for the newcomers, and today I'm going to be talking about one of the biggest philosophical questions ever asked. Does life have a divine author or not? Atheism versus Christianity. And I say Christianity instead of theism because I solely believe in the triune God of the Bible. I know I've wrestled with this question myself in the past, before meeting Jesus, of course. I've studied science, philosophy, history during my undergraduate years. I've listened to both believers and skeptics. I actually really love to watch debates about if God exists. Today, some of the most prominent atheists, people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, they argue passionately that science and reason alone explain the universe. They challenge religion and they point out what they see as contradictions and weaknesses in faith. And I respect their intelligence and their courage in asking these hard questions. But even they can't explain the universe's origin, the fine tuning of physics, or why humans have consciousness, morality, and a longing for meaning. They can explain how things work, but not why they exist in the first place. And to be honest, I'm not here to defend atheism. So you won't hear me bringing up any arguments in their favor. So this episode is mainly going to be about my belief in God and rejection of atheism. So let me just start with atheism. I know it sounds rational. The belief is in evidence, not faith. Show me proof and I'll believe. I mean, let's be honest. Evidence is super important when making a case, especially in a court of law. Without it, it's all circumstantial. But absence of evidence isn't proof that something doesn't exist. I used to think that way too. But the more that I look at the universe, the more atheism just stopped making sense. The rules of physics, they're so precisely tuned that if they even changed a little bit, life would be impossible. If gravity was just a little bit stronger or maybe a little bit weaker, the stars and the sun, they couldn't form or they would just burn out instantly. The universe is like a super delicate recipe. Change any one ingredient just a tiny bit and the whole thing stops working. And then somehow you're telling me that human consciousness appeared all from lifeless matter? Consciousness is our thoughts, our emotions, creativity. Atheists, they say it's all an accident, but Christianity says no, this was designed. There's intelligence behind it, purpose behind it. And for me, that explanation fits far better than it just happened. Now let's just talk about evolution for a little bit, because it's raised as one of the challenges to faith. Evolution explains the mechanics of life, the way species adapt, change, and survive over time. There's a lot of fascinating science there, and I respect it and I love science, but evolution doesn't explain the origin of life, nor does it explain the emergence of human consciousness, morality, and our sense of purpose. Atheists, they find evolution appealing because it explains how life changes and becomes more complex without needing to believe in a God. They make evolution sound really attractive, and I'm not gonna lie, I fell for it too. Some say that because humans and chimpanzees, they share about 98% of their DNA, that we must be closely related. But this idea starts to fall apart when we remember that humans also share 50% of their DNA with a banana. And clearly people are not half a banana. So so having similar DNA doesn't automatically mean that one species came from another. All living things share certain genes because we all need the same basic instructions for life so we can make energy and build cells. And that's why DNA looks similar across the species. It's like using the same alphabet to write very different books. Also, even if there's a small difference in DNA, it can make a huge difference in what the creature is like. So while humans and chimps do share a lot of genetic material, that doesn't prove that we have a common ancestor. It might just show that all life was made using the same basic design. And I say that life's diversity and details point to a creator who works through the natural world. God gives us a simple creation story in Genesis 1. The story is important because it tells us that the world was made with order, purpose, and goodness. It gives us a framework where science, morality, and purpose can coexist. Also, Christianity isn't just a belief system. It's also history. The story of Jesus isn't a legend written centuries later. We have historical sources, Roman, Jewish, and Christian, and they all mention him, a real man who lived, was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and whose followers claimed that he rose from the dead. The Roman historian Tacitus confirms Jesus' execution. The Jewish historian Josephus writes about him and his followers. And then the early disciples, they went from terrified fishermen to fearless witnesses, many of them dying for what they claimed to have seen. If it were a lie, someone would have cracked under pressure. Yet, instead, the movement exploded without armies, without power, just conviction. And that's not how a myth spreads. That's how the truth spreads. And here's another fact. The Bible wasn't written by one person or even one generation. It's about 40 different authors across different centuries from different backgrounds. There's kings, fishermen, prophets. They all came together to tell one story. And their account is coherent. It's consistent, and there's a unified message. It took about 1,500 years to compile the Bible. And the probability that such a collection of writings could align so perfect by mere chance is super small. It's like winning the lottery millions of times in a row. And to me, that points to something far beyond human effort, something divine. Have you seen the cross-reference chart? It's interesting because it shows how connected the Bible is. For example, prophecies in the Old Testament, they often link to events in the New Testament, and teachings or symbols that are repeated across time, they're just showing a sense of unity. And the Bible contains about 63 to 64,000 cross-references in total. So the guidance of God must have been at work, weaving these voices together into the Bible that we have today. That to me is evidence of divine intervention, a sign that this is not an ordinary book. And you have to remember that the printing press wasn't invented until the 1400s. The Bible was already made by then. Before then, books were copied by hand, and they took a very long time, and they were very expensive. So imagine getting all these different authors from different continents, different languages, different generations to make one unified story. Only the hand of God. That was his intervention. And there's another kind of evidence, the one that's written inside of us. We all long for love, for justice, meaning. We ache when something feels unfair, and we have a deep sense of, a deep sense that life should have a purpose. There should be a meaning. And where do these instincts come from? Because evolution explains the survival of the fittest, not self-sacrifice. Natural selection doesn't explain why we care for the weak, why do we feel guilty, and why does beauty move us? To me, these are fingerprints of and signs of a moral and personal creator. And Christianity offers the most beautiful answer, that our longing for goodness and love exists because we were made by goodness and love itself. God is love and God is good. And the Bible says in Romans 2:14-15, even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them that they are doing right. Science can't explain why we have a conscience or morals, but God tells us that his laws was written in our hearts. Morality didn't happen by chance. The fact that people everywhere have a sense of what's right and wrong shows that moral values come from something greater than human opinion or random evolution. While cultures may be different on certain details, most people agree that kindness, honesty, and justice are good, and that cruelty and lies are wrong. This shared moral understanding points to a moral law written on the human heart. If the universe were only the result of chance and survival, there would be no real reason to call one action good and another one evil. The existence of moral truth points to a moral source, a creator who designs humans with a conscience and a sense of right and wrong. And here's what sets Christianity apart from every other worldview: grace. Other religions say you work your way up to God. Christians say God came down to you. It's not about earning it, it's about receiving it. The message of Jesus isn't try harder, it's you're loved, you're forgiven, and you're invited into a new life. In the end, Christianity isn't blind faith, it's also evidence based. The universe points to a creator, history points to Jesus, the human heart points to meaning, and together they tell a consistent story that we were made for a relationship with God. Atheism can explain atoms and molecules, but it can't explain why we love, why we hope, or why we care about the truth in the first place. Christianity can. And maybe that's why it still matters, because it's not just a theory, it's actually true in life. And I'm not going to be getting into any of the historical items that we have, because the only thing that we really need is the Bible. That is enough evidence for Christianity. His words, they're still alive today. And it speaks to us individually, changing our hearts and our lives. And I know atheists don't like to hear that, but that is all we need. What they want is for us to go pull God from the sky and introduce him personally. And the funny thing is that that actually happened 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked the earth. And guess what? They still didn't believe him. So no amount of proof will ever satisfy a hardened heart. Just like Pharaoh's heart when Moses freed the Israelites. The only thing that we could do is pray that God will soften hearts so that they may receive the gospel. Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So if you only want to come to God, if you have physical proof, then you miss the part where faith is more important to God. Those who desire to draw near to God must have a deep-rooted belief that he's real. And Jesus makes it beautifully simple. All you need is faith as small as a mustard seed. That tiny spark of trust is enough for God to move mountains in your life. Alrighty, that is all for today. Thanks for listening. If this episode made you think, share it with a friend. Give me your thoughts, questions, ideas, and stay tuned for next week. Bye-bye.